All right, bringing the music down, bringing it down low. And welcome to Prepper Talk Radio. Thanks for listening here on AM 630 K-Talk. And
Crazy.
yes,
It's Wednesday already.
Life is crazy, and you got a little bit of sleep. I got a little bit of sleep. Sick families. That's life.
Sometimes you prepare and you do everything you can, and sometimes you just get hit with colds, or you just get hit with news that changes life, and you're stressed out. And yesterday I spent 13 hours working, plus 4 hours drive time. So it was a long day.
Yeah.
Drive time is actually the nicest part because it
I
was
agree.
relaxing.
Just turn the radio on or keep it off and
Crank the
have your thoughts
tunes
with you.
and make it home. So
one thing I wanted to bring up this morning is, we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary with Prepper Talk Radio.
crazy.
And I just wanted to say how grateful we are to the station owners and managers for asking us, first of all, to come on and then allowing us to stay and continue to talk about emergency preparation, preparedness, survival. And we're doing this as a service. I mean, Scott and I love to do this. We'd love to talk about this. We could all day, every day.
We could. We really could.
And
every day.
It's our true passion. I mean, I've found my calling in life, not necessarily in talk radio, but in preparedness and survival.
Helping others get prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. And we certainly hope that you've learned something. If not, that you have a little more passion, a little more energy to get yourselves prepared and more self-reliant for the future. I mean, that's what we're here and what we're all about, and we sure appreciate you listening and all the support from our sponsors. And speaking of sponsors, Survival Medical is still one of our sponsors. Fantastic people, fantastic first aid kits, and I want to remind you, I think they're still at the Sam's Club on 3rd West in Salt Lake near the Home Depot for a couple more days. Get down there
in Centerville next, or we'll check their website. It's all on their website. It's also on their Facebook page. We love Survival Medical. That's what I carry in my car. That's what I carry in my little go bag. I have a couple other kits as well from other companies, but my go-to is my Survival Medical. It seems to have everything I need exactly in the amounts that I need it, and it's going to last longer.
And guess what my kids are getting for Christmas?
Oh, you're going to spoil it for them already?
Oh, crap, I guess, if they do listen.
That's awesome.
No, I have some other things in mind for Christmas for them that I will not disclose.
That's awesome.
But they will be getting some Survival Medical. And as well, I will be adding more to the storage closet.
Nice.
Of Survival Medical this next month or so.
Perfect.
So Survival Medical, the only kits, first aid kits that are tougher than nature.
And if you can't get to the Sam's Club over off of 300 West, go to survival-medical.com. Mm-hmm. Check out all the different stuff. I mean, they've got the Alpha Bucket, which is for your big groups, the Bravo Bucket, which is just for your family, everything all the way down to the individual. And there's so many different things. If you need something for your boat, if you need something for fly fishing, they've got an idea for it, and they've got something there.
Good stuff. Absolutely good stuff.
We love it.
All right, so we can start the show now. Should we start the show?
Let's start the show. I'm excited. It's carryover from last week.
From last week. We had some really great callers, some great questions about gardening. And so we have Beuna Tomalino from gardeninspire.com. Did I get that right?
Tomalino, but
Tomalino, excuse me.
That's good.
Tomalino. I get it's kind of Spanish, so I see the A, the O, I get a little confused. Tomalino from Garden Inspire here with us, talking about fall prep for your gardens in particular. And one thing we really try to do here is prepare for the future. And without gardening, you're really not preparing properly. And part of being prepared, part of being a prepper, should and better include being able to produce your own food.
Absolutely.
And herbs, and even have a nice, beautiful yard. I mean, that's what you also do as well, right, Beuna?
Yes, that's right.
So tell us a little bit, we know you very well. Tell the listeners a little bit about how you came along this journey, what started Garden Inspire, and I know you've got some really cool classes that are coming up. So tell us a little bit about your journey, how you got to where you are, and then tell us what's coming up with the classes, and then we're going to start taking some callers.
Okay, sounds great. And congratulations on your 1-year anniversary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I grew up on an acre. My dad had grown up on a farm. We grew some of our own food, not a huge variety, but I had that experience, which I think is good for you to give your children.
Absolutely.
And so then when I went to school, I got a degree in ornamental horticulture. And I especially love teaching people how to grow their own food. I can work with other things too, but one of the classes I had in school was a native plants class. And our instructor took us hiking around. Bill Varga from Utah State University, who's also a mountain man, took us around hiking in different parts of Utah, learning about the native plants, learning how they were used in the past and all of that. And I found that fascinating. And so that kind of added, because some of those things you can eat.
Mm-hmm.
And then I reconnected with somebody that I'd known a few years ago, and she asked me to co-author a book with her about wild medicinal and edible plants. So we did that. But I've always loved herbs because of their scents and their usefulness. And when I say herbs, I mean a wide variety of plants.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically useful plants. So practically anything can fit in that category.
Okay.
But especially ones people think about for culinary use and things like that. So I started out actually doing landscape design, but realized I really like teaching people how to do things and helping them with plant identification, pest identification, all that. And I've been an organic gardener pretty much my whole life. That's what my parents did. They didn't call it that. That's just what it was.
Yeah, organic became a buzzword, I think, and it used to be that's all you did.
Right.
Yeah.
And now everyone's like, well, you got to buy seeds from so-and-so, Monsanto, blah, blah, blah.
And use pesticides and
Right.
and manufactured fertilizers and such. And
But along with that, a really important thing is compost, which is just decomposed organic matter.
Mm-hmm.
Nature does it all the time in forests.
Yep.
If you know how to make your own compost, that's huge. And learning how to do it now, this is a great time of year to start a compost pile if you don't have one, because
perfect.
most people have leaves.
okay, let's get into that a little bit deeper. Although before I forget, when you first walked in, you hand me this little card. It is a wild edible plants card, and it's just kind of a quick reference card listing the names of particular plants and the parts that you can eat.
Right.
And I find, last time we were here, I got one of your other books of wild edible plants because that interests me terribly, being able to survive out in the wilderness. And I know that's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but to have these resources like this little card, which I'm going to stick in my wallet and have with me all the time, and I could put it in my bug out bag as well, or my bug home bag. And so you can get these on your website as well, correct?
That's correct.
So she has fantastic books on her website that she has authored or co-authored, as well as these little quick reference cards that, like for the first one, for example, the first one on this card is alfalfa. You can eat the leaves, the young shoots, raw, cooked, and sprouted. So quick and easy. So because you have to have a little additional knowledge to know how to sprout your plants and so forth, but very cool. So go check out gardeninspire.com. And composting. I've tried this a little bit. I have, only a certain amount of available resources in my own backyard. Leaves that fall down that I could compost, or grass and so forth. What should I throw in a compost pile and what shouldn't I put in a compost pile?
So when you have trouble finding stuff, sometimes you have neighbors that are just throwing leaves away.
Okay.
And so sometimes you can go get stuff from other people because then they don't have to deal with it. So don't teach them how to compost so that they will have the leaves
They
for
give you everything. Now I understand. I've got leaves that fall in my backyard. I've got, of course, maple. I've got a giant oak the neighbor has, and fruitless mulberry. I understand that oak leaves are not the best to compost. Is that right?
I actually wouldn't worry about them here because our soil is very alkaline.
Okay.
And so I wouldn't worry about them. Any walnut leaves or nuts could be a problem because they have something toxic for certain plants.
Okay.
So if you have those, you would either not want to compost or compost them separately.
Okay.
So you're only using them with plants that aren't going to have a problem.
Interesting.
So when you want to compost, you generally want to have 1/2 to 2/3 brown, which mean things like leaves and straw. So like dead stuff, basically.
Right. So green would be like grass clippings.
Okay.
Except
I would leave the grass clippings on the lawn because it's better for your lawn. It's like composting right on your lawn. So I would just leave them there. Plus, if you use nasty stuff on your lawn, you're putting it in your garden.
Yep.
So when leaving on your lawn, so just cut it, don't bag it every week or every other week?
I don't ever bag.
Okay,
ever.
You never bag. Okay.
And if your lawn is dry enough, because it shouldn't be wet when you're mowing, and you're only cutting off up to the third of the blade, you shouldn't have problems with bunches of grass all over your lawn.
Okay, so are there particular lawn mowers that are like mulching mowers that are better than others for that, or just cut it and leave it?
There are mulching mowers, but I've done it even without a mulching mower, and I've never had a problem.
Okay.
But
That's pretty cool.
But if you're eating fruits and vegetables, you can take those fruits and vegetable parts that you're not eating or that rotted or whatever, and mix those in with the leaves, because that's adding the green part.
Okay.
So you want 1/3 to 1/2 green.
Okay.
So the best watermelon I ever had, we were actually doing our compost pile, and we threw all the seeds from the watermelon into the compost pile. The next year, we had this huge watermelon bush. I'm like,
Growing it out of the compost
I'm like, wow, what is this? And it's growing right out of the middle of the compost pile, and we're rotating the compost pile. There's one section we pulled for the garden that year, and the next section we're going to pull for the garden next year, and we're adding to it. And then we started adding to the other pile, and this thing started growing, and I'm like, what is this? So we just let it keep growing, and we had these huge watermelons coming out of there, and we're like, oh, awesome. Let's see if they're any good. And my mom's like, oh, those are going to be wrong. There's something going to be wrong with those. You're not supposed to eat right out of your compost pile. And I'm like, Mom, you're the one making us do the compost pile. And, man, those are the best watermelons. The most nutrient-rich, I'm sure. I mean, it was just incredible. I've never been able to grow a watermelon since.
So plant in your compost next time.
Oh yeah,
or use your compost in your soils, because I guess that's really the key to getting large plants and growing fast, is having those nutrients in the soil, which comes from organic material, not necessarily manufactured fertilizers. Although we did talk a little bit last week about like Epsom salt and calcium. What's your take on adding those types of elements to your soils?
So our soils have calcium, but sometimes the plants can't get it out.
Okay.
So with our pH being as high as it is, sometimes plants can't get the nutrients out. And that's a big problem with iron. There's iron in the soils, and sometimes they can't get it out. But adding organic matter helps moderate the pH, so it helps plants be able to get some of those nutrients out. I don't see anything wrong with adding things like Epsom salts. I add eggshells to my compost pile. I eat 2 eggs every morning, and all those eggshells go into my compost pile. They're not going to decompose like plant material will. They'll just break up into smaller pieces.
Okay.
But
so you wouldn't necessarily
adding
grind
some
those up
nutrients.
first and throw them in your compost?
You can do that, or just crunch them up a little bit or something. You probably want to break them up some, or you'll just have hunks of
big giant
hunks
shell.
Now, with a compost pile, you want to rotate that, correct?
Ideally.
Okay.
And I'm not great about that. And if I did, it would be done faster. You can get the tumblers, and some people, that's all they have for their compost pile. If you have that, you're going to have another place that you want to keep some of your material so it can start composting. Because if you're continuing to add to a rotating drum or any kind of pile, it's never going to be finished. So if you can put material in the rotating drum and have it less than half full, so that it turns well. Like if you cram your clothes dryer full of clothes,
it doesn't
Nothing
dry.
doesn't dry.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we used to have to hand turn our pile.
right.
And that was my job as a kid.
That can be
Then thankfully I got a little older and started working some part-time jobs. It became my brother's job. But we'd hand turn it, and so we'd rotate it. But yeah, there were times where if you didn't hand turn it, it didn't fully decompose. You'd have to dig for the good stuff.
right.
Yeah, good stuff's on the bottom.
Good stuff's at the bottom.
Right.
So if you turn it, the more often you turn it within reason, the faster it will be done. Now, one of the classes I'm teaching this week is a composting class.
Oh,
and
excellent.
It's
Nice.
tonight.
Okay.
What time is that class,
And
and
where is
where
it
can we get
It's
information?
at Woods Cross High, and it's $10. It's through the Adult Community School. So if you just show up at Woods Cross High a little bit before 7, go in the office, register for the class, you can show up.
Excellent.
And anybody old enough to be willing to listen is welcome.
Very cool.
That's very cool.
Awesome. So we're coming up on our break here, and we've just got about 30 seconds left. So I wanted to give out the phone number, 801-254-5855. We've got a call coming in. I will answer that call and take you on the other side of the break. And feel free to call in and have ask Beuna whatever questions you might have.
And as a reminder, we are brought to you by Survival Medical, who's actually going to be at the Murray Sam's Club starting on the 29th.
Oh, okay.
Which is right off State Street in 215.
Okay, perfect.
So check it out. Get over there. Get your gear. And if you can't get there, get it on survival-medical.com.
All right, perfect. 10 seconds left till break before our music starts kicking in. So a little bit early here, but thank you so much for joining us, Beuna. We this is good information that we all need to learn and practice too. So another thing I want to talk about the other side of the break is us with small lots and small properties. How we can better take advantage of that small resource.
Yeah, maximize that space.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we'll see you on the other side of the break. As much as I love that music, we'll bring it back in to Prepper Talk Radio. Thanks for listening. And Prepper Talk Radio is, of course, brought to you by survivalmedical.com, the only first aid kits tougher than nature. And find them at the Sam's Club for a few more days here in Salt Lake, and then up in Murray.
Down in Murray.
Excuse
over
me.
in Murray.
Over, down, up. I'm fairly critical.
Geographically, it's pretty close.
Yeah.
It's pretty close.
Over in Murray.
Over.
Anyway, we're talking to Beuna Tomalino of Tomalino of
You can
Garden
just say
Inspire.
Beuna, that's fine.
Beuna. We're talking to Beuna. I like to be formal, so thanks for coming on, Beuna. I had a couple of great questions during the break, and that are perfectly pertinent. First of all, is it appropriate, is it okay to add iron directly to your compost pile if you don't have a source, or what would be a good source of iron to add to that compost pile?
So I just think adding a variety of materials to your compost is the best way to have a variety of nutrients. There are mineral supplements. Names escape me at the moment. Mm-hmm. But there's one that I've found here locally that's from a volcano. And it's very fine. And the plants can absorb it faster than some mineral supplements, which take months or years.
Is it sourced down in Nephi? I've heard of a source down there, and I forget the name of the.
So.
There's an Idaho sourced product too. My neighbor uses that.
Okay, cool.
He actually he buys it and it's already powdered, and he mixes it in, and then he also takes oyster shells and for more calcium.
So what source do you use, Beuna, for your iron, for your whatever you want to add to your garden? Where do you go?
So I have used this one supplement that I can't remember the name of right now. I think it's listed on my website because I was able to get some and wholesale to sell, and I know it's been available at an American Fork nursery.
Okay.
But it comes in bags, and you just spread it around. You don't need to mix it with water. So I've used that. I don't think it's necessary to use that very often, like maybe once a year. But most of the time, I haven't had any problems with iron chlorosis, which is what a pale green leaf with dark green veins is one sign, can be a sign of iron chlorosis. But I've found, like when I'm talking to clients, I tell them just add some compost around the tree as mulch or something, and they have had good success that way because that moderates the pH, allowing the plants to get out the iron that's
out
there.
of the soil. So iron chlorosis is a lack of iron, correct?
Yes.
The plant. Okay. Now
So we have a question from a text-in question.
Okay.
Wants to know what's the difference between aerobic and non-aerobic compost.
So aerobic is using air. So it's microorganisms that need air to be able to decompose everything.
So is that why it's rotated? You rotate?
And that's one reason why you rotate it, so it doesn't get all mashed down and doesn't have any air. Anaerobic are things that don't use air to compost.
So where would I use those different types of compost?
So most of the time you would probably want to have an aerobic kind of compost. So as long as you're getting air in there, then there should be aerobic things that need that environment to do the decomposing.
Okay, so when you're driving by a big farm and you see these big piles of whatever it might be, organic matter that are covered, that's anaerobic. They're using heat to compost?
Well,
it's creating its own heat?
You can put a tarp over it and it can still be aerobic as long as it's getting turned.
Okay.
So anaerobic would be like if you take all your leaves and put them in a garbage bag and leave them sitting there.
Okay.
And then you open it up and it smells really bad. Now, there's a kind of composting I found out kind of recently about, and it's one of the ones I'm going to talk about in my class tonight. But actually, I can't remember how to say it. But anyway, it's a Japanese name, and it uses the anaerobic. And what you do is you're essentially fermenting your vegetable peelings in a bucket. And so you put them in there, you smash them down, add more to kind of squish out the air. Then you seal it for about 10 days. And then every other day you want to drain off the liquid. And so you can actually get a composter that has a spigot and everything.
Can you use that liquid to add to your garden?
Yes,
Okay.
but you want to dilute it because it's going to be strong and a bit acidic.
Right. Okay.
And then after those 10 days, you can take it and put it in your compost pile or in your garden, but you don't want it right next to plants. The point of that is it starts the decomposition process faster, and then it just needs to finish in your garden or your compost pile. And it's like pickling all your vegetable peelings, basically. So it has more of a vinegar smell instead of being the stinky.
Yeah, so that inspires a couple of questions for me. First of all, have you heard of liquid dirt? It's a product that was at PrepperCon, and he takes all these different components and ferments them and so forth. Have you ever used that? Is that?
I have not.
Okay.
I've heard the name, but I don't know a lot about it.
Well, then I should probably give it a try.
Yeah, check it out.
Yeah.
Cool guy.
And then another question I had, if I can remember my question now. Go ahead, Scott. I
know you're like
I
hogging the
remember my
time. I'm
question.
like, dude,
I know.
I don't want to talk about composting the whole time.
Okay. All right,
I'm going to be honest.
All right. No,
composting, boring topic. It's a necessary evil or necessary good, whatever. But it's absolutely boring. What I want to know is, I'm working on a greenhouse right now, so that I can extend my growing season. What can I still put in the ground right now that I can still get a reasonable harvest from before it gets too cold? Because you can't run a greenhouse year-round unless I get a heater and all those other stuff. I don't want to do that yet.
So it partly depends on how warm the greenhouse is going to be. But there's quite a few edibles that can handle some cold weather and even some frost without it killing them.
Okay.
Things like spinach and kale, pretty much all your leafy stuff except basil.
Okay.
Basil can't handle the cold at all. And peas are probably going to rot if the ground isn't warm enough. They don't like it hot. But I've had spinach that I've planted in the fall, and it came up a little bit, and it was there the next year. The snow melts, there it is, it keeps growing.
Interesting. So I can get a lot of spinach then.
And onions.
I've got a call here on line 3. Let's take them and see what. Let me turn this on first. Make sure we got that there. Hello, caller. You had a question for us?
Yeah, I was just wondering if she ever uses comfrey as like a fertilizer or adds it to her compost and all this and all there.
I didn't quite catch your entire question there. You're very quiet. Could you repeat that again, please?
Oh, comfrey. If she ever uses comfrey as a fertilizer or adds it to her compost.
So comfrey pulls a lot of nutrients out of the soil. Comfrey contains a lot of nutrients. So it's supposed to be a really good thing to add to your compost pile. You can use it as a mulch. Some people plant it under their fruit trees.
Okay. What exactly is comfrey?
It is an herb that is really nutritious, although the FDA says we shouldn't take it internally, but you can make poultices and things out of it. It has fairly large leaves. It tends to spread a bit, so wherever you plant it, you want to make sure that's where you want it, because if you leave a little root, it will still be there.
Okay.
So it's pretty hardy. It'll just stay.
Okay.
Yes.
I had another question, but if you want, should we keep talking about greenhouses?
Well, is it about...
Oh, no, it's about soil testing, so let's make sure to get back to that.
Okay, let's talk about soil testing, and then we'll get off the soil and
okay, cool, and then get to greenhouses. So
yes.
this caller during the break...
Killing me.
Sorry, Scott. Had a question about testing soils. We talked a little bit about that last week. What's your resource? What do you do? Do you test it all, or do you, like you're saying, do you just compost and hope for the best, essentially?
So the only time I've ever done a soil test, I lived in Alaska, and I did landscaping up there, and my boss asked, and the soil's very acidic. Mm-hmm. My boss asked me to take a sample in to have it tested because she was worried that it was so acidic, maybe things weren't growing well because of that. Mm-hmm. Other than that, I never have, because I feel like that's more something you would need to do if you're using synthetic fertilizers. Because if you're using synthetic fertilizers, you're more likely to be out of balance, because they don't contain everything. Most don't contain everything a plant needs, and they don't contain what we don't even know plants need yet.
And it's like a Band-Aid. It just is a temporary...
And I wouldn't even use it at all.
Okay.
But
good to know.
So if you're using organic material, compost, organic fertilizers, then there's less of a chance of going over because you're feeding the soil. The soil is in turn feeding the plants.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's less likely to be out of balance. So I haven't had anything that I've worked with that indicated to me that I had a deficiency somewhere or too much of whatever.
Okay, so last week we had a call from Falcon. He was growing garden in buckets, and he had some really strange effects on his tomato plants after using, I guess, a particular soil. Is that at one point where you would maybe go get a soils test from like the extension, UVU extension, or would you just add more organics to it?
So if there was something going on and I couldn't figure out what it was, then that's a situation where I may have a soil test. Sometimes a deficiency might cause things to look a funny color, but it's possible it's something else. So first I would try to identify what it is, and if I can't, then maybe I would get a soil test done. And you can go through the Extension Service, some garden centers and nurseries also.
Okay.
Now, with Scott's example of growing watermelons directly in the compost pile, can you add too much organics to your soils? I mean, how are you supposed to add that?
So I think it would be difficult to do, especially in Utah, because naturally in Utah there's very little.
Okay.
Because we don't have high rainfall, so we don't tend to have a lot of plants decomposing like in a forest in the northwest or something. So I think it's difficult to do that. I've planted in straight compost before on purpose. It wasn't a compost pile, but I have stuff grow in the compost pile. But I have made raised beds and garden beds out of straight compost.
Okay. And they've grown well for you? Okay.
Yes.
So you can really maybe only get your soils too hot if you use the chemicals and such.
You can get it too hot if you are using unfinished compost. So if you took fresh cow manure or something like that and put it in your garden and tried to plant in it, it's not finished yet. And so then you could burn your plants. But I have used finished compost right on my lawn and other things. I've never had a problem.
What does finished compost look like?
So it tends to look more like soil. You may see bits of eggshell or something like that, but it's mostly going to look and smell like a good soil.
And how long does that usually take? Sorry, we're getting back on the composting.
We've been hijacked. I just know I'm never going to grow my fall garden because of Shane.
Okay, you're next, Scott. Sorry.
So it depends how often you're turning it and temperatures and what you're adding to it, and if you're continuing to add to it instead of just letting it get finished.
Okay.
So a month to several months.
Okay. All right. Sorry, Scott.
So growing up, we'd rotate every spring and fall would be the different compost pile.
Okay.
So we'd take about 3 months to rotate a pile.
So you need more than one pile.
Well, we just had two. That's all we needed to do. But then there were years we kept composting and we never used it. And so eventually we got to this point because we kind of fell on the wayside of gardening that we had a giant compost pile where all the stuff at the bottom was like amazing. And then the top 1.5 foot was garbage, because we didn't turn it. We just left it there.
Not composted yet.
Yes, it was unusable because it wasn't ready.
Yeah.
Okay, to the greenhouse.
Okay, so even without a greenhouse, I know last week we had callers asking what they can still plant right now that they can still expect to harvest, or what are the things that we should be doing for fall harvest, for late season growing. Do you recommend like bucket methods or box gardens, or what's the best way to manage that going into the fall?
Well, I have raised beds and I plant in the ground because I do edible landscaping, which we can talk about as far as the small lot thing. And I also grow things in pots that I grow as houseplants. So I have a pepper plant that I've had for a few years because peppers are not an annual, they just freeze. So if you're going to grow something inside, then it doesn't really matter what the weather's doing.
Okay.
But if you want to plant stuff outside and you want to plant things like vegetables, you could try spinach and lettuce, and depending when we get snow, like lots of snow and major frost, you may be able to harvest this fall. And if not, those things may just grow the rest of the time next year, and so you're not necessarily out anything.
Okay.
But it's also a great time to plant trees and shrubs and perennials. But I would do it today or wait till the storm is over so you're not out there in the mud, because that's not good for you or the soil.
Okay. So, the storm coming Friday, right? So what kind of trees, any kind of fruit tree, or do I need to be careful?
You could plant you should be able to plant anything right now. Now, what nurseries have now isn't usually as good a selection, but sometimes they have good deals.
Yeah, I've noticed the prices are like 40% off.
But if you plant now, the plant is still growing underground all winter, and so it's more ready to grow in the spring because its roots and everything have been growing.
And it's still somewhat dormant in the winter, so it's less of a shock to the plant?
Well, it can be, because if you plant in the spring or you plant late spring and it's starting to get hot, then you're going to be more concerned about making sure you're caring for it properly so it's not going into that shock of being planted in hot weather.
Okay.
But a big thing is just that things planted in the fall tend to be better in spring than if you planted it in the spring, because it has had all that winter for the roots and everything to grow.
Okay, so you could still plant leafy plants, leafy vegetables outside right now without a greenhouse and still possibly have something to eat.
Possibly, yes.
Okay.
What about, like, could I do roots? Can I do potatoes and carrots this late in the season if in a greenhouse?
In a pot in the house.
In a pot in the house?
Maybe in a greenhouse.
Is the
It
ground
depends
too
how
cold?
warm.
The ground gets too cold? Or?
Well, they can rot.
Okay.
And so they might start rotting before they start growing.
Okay.
Really?
But I have left potatoes in the ground all winter long and dug them up in the spring and still been good to eat.
Right. And sometimes that works if
Okay,
they're insulated enough.
Okay. They're
But if
deep
you
enough,
tried
I
to
guess.
plant them now,
Right.
then you may not really get any growth. It may just rot. It's hard to say.
But it may grow in the spring.
Right.
Okay.
Maybe. And so, if you have some around, I'm one that just tries stuff and,
Give it a
see what
shot.
works. Yeah.
Well, I didn't plant any cherry tomatoes this year, but I had 3 cherry tomato plants come up because I said just let them fall to the ground and tilled the soil in the spring, and they came up. So is it better to till your soil now or in the spring?
So I don't ever till.
Oh, okay. Let's talk about that when we come back. You are listening to Prepper Talk Radio here on K-Talk AM 630 with our sponsor, Survival Medical, the only first aid kits tougher than nature.
Check them out, survival-medical.com. Well, welcome back to Prepper Talk Radio on K-Talk AM 630. You can check out our new website, ktalkmedia.com. It's going to be continually growing and evolving. We've got some new content on there. We're going to have some more video content. Download the app, and you can take us anywhere you go. Or if you miss a show, check us out on the archive. We're always there. You're listening to Prepper Talk Radio. You can find us specifically on Facebook or preppertalkradio.net, as well as many of the other social media sites.
And, of course, preppercon.com, preparedguy.com.
Driving around, you can see our vehicles.
That's right.
They're wrapped. Well, I got to wrap my truck. I just switched trucks. I went diesel. I went full tough guy. And, oh, my gosh, it's a chipped truck. It's fast.
Let's go.
I got to keep turning it off the
need to
race
race.
mode.
You
I
and
didn't realize what it could do. And I'm like, oh, there goes a full tank of gas, dummy.
Yeah.
So
Today makes it fun, right?
But today we're lucky. We've got Survival Medical taking care of the bills, keeping the lights on here at K-Talk, and keeping the blood in the body, keeping the burns to a minimum, and doing just a fantastic job. They've got kits that are tougher than nature. Everything that they create with a purpose. The coolest thing that I love about Survival Medical is their kits last over up to 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
They've created a little atmosphere inside those containers that you can open it and reseal it, and it'll still stay good. Only company that's doing it. Total game changer in first aid, so you're not blowing through a couple $100 a year on first aid because it expires. So check them out, survival-medical.com, or head over to Sam's Club in Salt Lake for another couple of days, and on the 29th, you can check them out in Murray Sam's Club.
Perfect.
So, and today we have Beuna with Garden
Tomalino.
Inspired.
I got it right.
There you go. GardenInspired.com. We're talking about soil enhancements. We're talking about, check out our website, GardenInspired.com. The store, you can see Nature's Perfect Soil Enhancement. It's what she uses. But she also uses her own composting. Now we're talking about what you can grow, what to grow, and how to get a better harvest. I want to know more how to get a better harvest.
Yeah, we left talking about you didn't turn your soil. This makes me very curious.
So tilling can actually be damaging to soil because it kills off soil microorganisms and worms and things like that, which are really important. And it also can create a hard pan, which means if you till 6 inches down on a regular basis,
I see,
or even once a year, it can create a hard pan, which prevents roots and water from penetrating past that point. And if you have weed or grass that you don't want to spread, and you till it, you're chopping up the roots and spreading it or bringing weed seeds to the surface.
Okay.
And so I put compost down, and then when I plant, little stuff I'm mixing it in as I plant, or if I'm planting something bigger, I will mix compost in with the soil I took out of the hole.
Okay. So what about like potatoes and carrots where you need some kind of a softer soil or some depth for those to grow? Is that...
I grow them in a pot or a raised bed.
Okay.
And then you don't have to worry about that because it is softer. And they actually did a study which found out they got a better harvest of potatoes doing it that way.
Really?
And you're not cutting into potatoes and damaging them because you basically dump out your pot and there's your potatoes or whatever. So it's really easy to harvest.
Okay.
So when you're talking about doing like a pot, you're talking about just those little tan pots or little red pots, right? Like certain sizes, like 2 gallon or
so if you're going to
5
grow,
gallon.
if you're going to grow in a grow something like potatoes, then you would want a bigger pot, like a 16-inch, something like that.
Okay. Could I go with me? This might sound a little insane.
Okay.
Could I do a 55-gallon drum? Because I saw online where this guy did a 55-gallon drum, and he started at the bottom, and he started adding dirt throughout the season and kept growing that taller to get a larger harvest. Have you done that, or do you know anyone that does that? Is that good?
I haven't actually done it in a 55-gallon drum. There's nothing wrong with that. It's going to be a little harder to dig it out because of the size, and you're not going to be dumping it out.
I can't dump it out?
Well,
Dang
do you have a forklift?
No, but I'm tip it over.
I'm a hefty fella.
Still, I mean,
I've got a big diesel now. I can pull it over.
That's true. Now check this out. I had a friend that took one of these totes and took the plastic out of the tote and left the wire, the cage, the I guess it's not a wire mesh, but it's essentially like a conduit type mesh cage, and grew potatoes out of every side of this bin.
Yeah,
pretty cool. So you got potatoes at the top, potatoes around the side, and get a lot of potatoes in a small
potatoes
area.
Form above the tuber you plant.
Okay,
and
right.
so when you plant the tuber, you want to keep covering it up, and how tall it gets depends on the variety of potato partially. But every time it's growing, you want to cover it up so there's just the very top leaves showing, because then not only will you get a better harvest, you don't want any of those tubers turning green because they're toxic.
Okay.
So you can plant them and cover it with leaves or straw, or cover it with like a potting mix, something lightweight, not heavy like a garden soil. So you can put it in like a cage kind of thing if you're using straw or leaves. If you're using soil, you actually, you'd have to hold it in a little
with
bit
straw,
better.
right, or something.
But you can have the potatoes growing out the side or just the top, any of that. Yeah, that works.
Very cool.
Now, how much sunlight do I actually need going into the fall? I mean, I know sunlight gets less and less per day. I've got a really weird backyard because I'm on a hill, and so everything east is in the shade until at least noon. And then we start getting direct sunlight. We get light, but we don't get direct sunlight until noon for the backyard because it's so low, and then everything's in the way, scrub oak and everything else. So can I expect everything to grow okay with only sunlight from noon till 6 o'clock right now?
So if it was the heat of summer, probably, but because it's in the shade, it's going to be colder. So that would be the concern. You could certainly try it and see, but all those things I mentioned don't need a lot of sun.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Well, that's why I'm thinking a greenhouse to try to keep it warmer. Because just a normal garden, I'd also have to stay out there and fend off the deer, which it's a nice food source, but my neighbors will get really ticked because they feed them. It's like they're pets. I don't understand.
Right.
But I look at it as my food supply in the future, and they'll be pissed at me. But deer's good.
But you'll be alive and they won't.
Yeah, and then I'll have a garden too, hopefully. So, but okay, so sunlight. The biggest thing isn't really the sunlight; it's the heat. It's the warmth.
Well, it's going to be both. But
Okay.
this time of year, I would be concerned about it being too cold
Okay.
when it's not getting as much light.
Sunlight.
Okay.
But again, if you're just trying a few seeds or something, what are you out?
Right.
Not much.
Right. Because mostly it's just to get the thing built and get the process started, so I can start testing.
And as far as deer, go to my website, and in the upper right-hand corner is a search bar. Put in deer, and it gives you a lot of different ideas for
Like
things that
marinades
might
or
work. No,
Jerky and
jerky.
pemmican.
no, I don't have anything like that.
Now, here's my question. I have a very shady backyard, and my plants just do not grow very well. Some do. My raspberries do extremely well. What else can I plant in a fairly shady backyard that I get, half a day of sunlight?
So all the leafy vegetables that we're eating the leaves. So cabbage family, spinach, lettuce, all those things, onions, parsley, mint, but don't put it in the ground. It'll take over the yard. But in pots,
right. Okay.
you can do it.
Yeah.
Root vegetables, maybe. They tend to need a little bit more sun. But the things that need a lot of sun are the things we eat the fruit of. Like tomatoes, peppers, squash.
Yeah, my tomatoes
cucumbers.
never do very well.
But fruits, small fruits like strawberries and raspberries, those things in nature are an understory tree.
Right, they're underneath the canopy. They're at the base of the trees, and okay.
So fruiting trees that we typically think of like peaches and apples need more sun, but those smaller fruiting plants don't need as much.
That settles it. The rest of my yard's going to be in raspberries.
There you go.
And if you don't contain them, it will be.
Oh yes.
What about blueberries and like blackberries and all those other types of berries? I mean, are they similar to raspberries? I don't know enough about fruits.
So blackberries are very similar to raspberries. They're related, and they will take over your yard too, and they don't need a lot of sun. Blueberries need acidic soil, and so that makes them more difficult to grow here, and deer really like to eat the shrubs.
I was actually growing a really good one when I lived in Murray, and my wife decided to go weed that section of the yard, or the foliage, and pulled it out. And I was like, are you kidding me? It's taken so long to grow that thing. And she's like, I thought it was weed. I'm like, it had a marker. It said blueberry bush. And she goes, I thought that was just a joke. I'm like, why?
Okay, we've got a caller here on line 3. Let's go ahead and take this. Go ahead, caller. You have a question for Beuna?
I sure do. This is Pat calling.
Yes, sir.
And Beuna, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing real good. I got a question for you guys. I planted tomatoes this year. Got huge plants. Kept them watered all summer long. Got bushels of tomatoes, but only 2 or 3 of them are red. All of them are dark green. What do I do to ripen them up?
So one thing you want to do is cut back on watering, which is going to be difficult because nature's going to do that for us. But another thing that you can do is take a spade and cut around the plant out a few inches, and that's pruning off the roots, and that tends to spur the plant on to start ripening that fruit. How tall is the plant?
About 3-4 feet. I mean, there's just tons of tomatoes the size of baseballs, huge tomatoes. And let's say every plant has probably 20-30 tomatoes on it. 1 is red, or 2 are red. But the other ones are dark green, harder than a rock.
So I would do some root pruning with a spade, probably at least halfway around the plant, and cut off some of those roots. And that should help get it to ripen the fruit. I was asking about the height, because if it's continuing to grow tall, you can just cut the top off of the plant. And then research some recipes for some green tomatoes, because you're probably still going to have some of those too. And you can use them in place of tomatillos to make salsa verde.
Oh, fantastic.
Oh,
I didn't know that. I didn't realize that. Well, does that answer all your questions?
Yeah, it sure did.
Perfect. Thanks for the call. I sure appreciate it.
Okay, guys, have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So my question to talk more about that discussion is my tomatoes are green as well, but I don't get a whole lot of sunlight. Does that also affect them ripening and turning red?
I don't believe so. And one reason why, so I lived in Alaska for a few years, and my parents were up there. And my dad came up with this theory that kind of made sense to me, but I've never heard this anywhere. Because up there, it takes a long time to get your tomatoes to ripen, which I don't think it's the weather, although they have a shorter growing season. But he was speculating that it was all the sunlight.
Okay.
And I wasn't there long enough to really experiment, but I wanted to try to experiment to cover up the plants and see, if they would start ripening faster. Because if your tomatoes are green and you want to have them ripen over winter, so you want more of them to turn red, you can pick them when they're green, as long as they're more the light green, not the dark green where they're just barely there. And you can, for example, in your basement, put a layer of newspaper, the tomatoes spread out so they're not touching, another layer of newspaper on the top, and then just check them, and if any are rotting, throw them away. But you can have some ripen that way. They're not like vine ripened, but some people think they're supposed to put them on in the sunlight to ripen, and you don't do that.
True.
I learned that last year. I put half of mine in the sunlight, and the other half were just on the counter. Out of the sunlight, the counter ones did great.
Right. Now, we've got another call here. Let's take this. We only have a few minutes left. Go ahead, caller. You have a question for Beuna?
I have an observation on if your tomatoes aren't ripening, and if you get all the way toward first frost and you know that we're going to lose them all, you can pull the plants up whole, leave the tomatoes on, hang them roots up in your cellar, and that'll sometimes they'll keep doing what they're doing, and if they're still hard green, they might not, but if they've got a little color showing, they'll go more red before they rot, hanging upside down in the basement.
I have heard that.
And I have heard of doing that. I've never had a place to hang them upside down, so I've never tried that method. But it's
you're kind of limited on space, but there's a potential for somebody, perhaps, if they've got the room to do that.
Right, it's still pulling some nutrients from the plant itself while it's still hanging upside down, and so less chance of it to rot that way. So, yeah, great topic, great point there. Appreciate you bringing that up. Did you have any other questions? All right, thank you very much for your call. Sure appreciate it. In our last minute or so here, anything else you wanted to let us know? I mean, what else should we be planting here in Utah? What does well?
If I could just mention really quickly, I have 3 free classes this Saturday at the Woods Cross High School. They're having a South Davis County Emergency Preparedness Fair.
Awesome.
That's a great fair to be at. It's really, really good. It's small, a lot of neat little vendors. And then a ton of classes. So which 3 classes are you going to be teaching?
So I'm going to be teaching gardening and survival times at 9. And then I have a class at noon and one at 2. And one of them is wild edible plants. And one of them is edible landscaping.
Those are the 2 classes I need to go to.
And you're nice and close to where
I'm nice and close. My challenge is I've got lots of work that
day. Don't we all? Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us, Beuna. We sure appreciate it. And thanks, everybody, for listening here at Prepper Talk Radio. You're listening to AM 630 K-Talk, and we will see you next week.